Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. Today we will be discussing the question of Egypt's potential threat to Israel. The rationale for this talk lies in the Egyptian military buildup. Although this began in 2007, it has sped up significantly with time, specifically with the rise to power of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Naturally, the question before us is whether such a buildup represents a danger to the State of Israel. Before proceeding to the focus of this talk, let's quickly survey the area's history. Approximately 42 years ago, Egypt and the State of Israel signed a peace accord, pursuant to which Israel withdrew from the Sinai Peninsula in return for its demilitarization. The core of the agreement is contained in the military appendix, which severely restricts Egypt's military presence in Sinai. These restrictions provide Israel sufficient time to mobilize in case of attack. In essence, the agreement divides Sinai into two zones. The western zone, Zone A, where the Egyptian army is permitted to station no more than one division consisting of 22,000 soldiers, and in the eastern portion, designated as Zone B, in proximity to the Israeli border. Zone B should be completely demilitarized. In other words, not even a single unarmed, uniformed soldier is permitted there. Following this brief recapitulation of the peace accord, a few general words on the Egyptian army are in order. The orders of battle of the Egyptian army number 16 divisions. 9 of them are mechanized divisions, 4 are armored divisions, and 3 are light infantry divisions. In addition, independent brigades and regiments form a large portion of the Egyptian army, and thus any accurate quantification of Egyptian force should utilize brigades in lieu of divisions. The Egyptian army comprises nearly 120 brigades, when all army brigades are included, those comprising the divisions as well as those operating independently. Since 2014, soon after al-Sisi's rise to power, the Egyptian army has added at least 60,000 soldiers. Later on, we will talk a bit about preparations, primary means of battle, procurement, and toward the end of the seminar, I will focus on the accelerated pace of construction of military infrastructure, primarily in Sinai and in the Suez Canal area. An additional component of military force is training, which I will not discuss at this time. Moving on to the subject of preparation. There are 16 ground force divisions. Nearly all are positioned in the area between Cairo and the Israeli border, where the vast majority of the Egyptian army is based. This leaves another 3 divisions to the west of Cairo, one stationed in Alexandria, while 2 additional divisions are stationed at less than full strength on the Egyptian border with Libya, west of the map shown here. Meanwhile, what is happening in Sinai? I mentioned a little earlier that the Egyptian army is permitted to hold no more than one mechanized division consisting of a maximum of 22,000 soldiers. However, the Egyptian chief of staff publicly admitted several years ago that 44,000 soldiers, divided into 88 battalions, are stationed in Sinai. In other words, he admits to double the number of agreed-upon forces. The State of Israel, by the way, has agreed in principle to such increase in force as a result of the Egyptian claim that terrorist organizations are attacking in Sinai, and a failure to beef up the Egyptian army might lead to this leaking into Israel. In any case, Israel has quote-unquote consented to the Sinai reinforcements. However, the claim made by the Egyptian Army Chief of Staff referenced only 88 battalions. My claim, based on a study of the infrastructure, is a bit different. I maintain that there are at least 170 battalions in Sinai. It is difficult to quantify this in manpower terms, but we are talking about an order of magnitude of 3 divisions, that is 3 times the number permitted by the peace agreement. What can the Egyptian army boast about in terms of equipment? I include here a tremendous number of acquisitions made in recent years. I won't enumerate every item on this exhaustive list, but you can always pause the presentation to review it. I focus here only on the main points. The Egyptian army numbers nearly 1 million soldiers, half of them on active duty, and the remainder in reserves. The land forces are equipped with over 4,000 tanks and more than 3,200 artillery guns. The Egyptian Air Force is armed with over 1,000 aircraft, as you can see. The Aerial Defense Branch numbers over 100 ground-to-air missile batteries. Various research institutes rank the Egyptian Navy 7th by size. It comprises approximately 300,000 vessels, including such advanced vessels as helicopter carriers and modern submarines constructed in Germany. When evaluating the force of a military, civilian research organizations such as myself are in the dark about a number of aspects of a nation's armament, which are necessary to form a complete picture. The first thing is nuclear weapons potential. Egypt was the first country in the Middle East to construct nuclear plants for research as early as the 1950s. Since then, however, civilian researchers and organizations such as myself do not have any data on the Egyptian efforts to develop nuclear weapons. So that is one question I can't answer. The second question concerns chemical weapons. In the 1960s, Egypt used chemical weapons in its war in Yemen. I cannot answer the question of their current activity in the field of chemical weapons. The same gap applies to biological weapons. Some Arab countries, such as Syria, are known to possess biological weapons. Civilian research organizations have no data on whether there are any biological weapons currently in Egypt, and if so, of what type. The next topic, shrouded in doubt, concerns ground-to-ground missiles. The Egyptians developed infrastructure for 1,000 ground-to-ground missiles as early as the 1973 war. They have since developed additional infrastructure for another 1,000. While there is currently no doubt that there are ground-to-ground missiles in Egypt, no information exists on the number and type of missiles in their possession. Another remaining question is the subject of electronics, interceptions, and electronic warfare and cyber warfare. It can be reasonably assumed that most nations of the world have capabilities in this area, but I cannot offer details here. The final area in doubt concerns accurate or smart ammunition. Most armies of the world are currently arming themselves with highly accurate aerial bombs. No information exists regarding the Egyptians' capabilities, however. Should we attempt to characterize the Egyptian army's acquisition spree, we might say that since 2013, at least $40 billion were procured in military equipment. Egypt strives to acquire the best weapon systems offered for sale in the global markets, and also attempts to diversify its sources to avoid dependence on a single nation that might not want to provide weapons in a timely fashion. Furthermore, Egypt makes efforts to develop many types of weapons itself and has a highly developed military industry. For example, Egypt manufactures American Abrams tanks, considered highly dependable. It also operates shipyards and many ammunition factories. From all these massive acquisitions and the significant self-production, Egypt has created large reserves for itself, reducing dependency on imports at times of emergency. As I mentioned, Egypt has made significant acquisitions, but at the same time, many nations around the world are also shopping for weapons. The table before you shows the effects of the acquisition on Egypt's military status in the world. This compares 2012 to our current situation in 2021. In 2012, Israel was ranked 13th in military strength, Egypt was ranked 14th, and Iran was ranked 16th. Following the acquisition spree, Egypt has slightly increased its standing in the world and is currently ranked 13th. For comparison, Iran is also manufacturing and acquiring weapons and has risen to 14th place. Egypt's greatest achievement is a widening of the gap between itself and Israel. If in the past Israel's forces were ranked 13th globally, nowadays, following Egypt's acquisition spree, Israel lags behind and is currently ranked 20th, far below the Egyptian army. This, in essence, represents the greatest achievement of the Egyptian acquisition program. This brings us to the main topic, namely infrastructure development. I must explain why I think it is the main topic. When a nation acquires weapons, such acquisitions may serve, in theory, any number of purposes. They may be used for defense against various enemies or to attack them. Thus, tracking and analyzing military infrastructure practically uncovers a nation's military thinking and how it truly intends to utilize these weapons in the future. We will now move to a brief review of a number of related topics. The first concerns the bridges over the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal separates Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. It is currently 300 meters wide, and such an obstacle obviously represents a problem for any army's movement. Notice that from the signing of the peace accord through 2004, Egypt had 6 options to cross the canal, which included 1 tunnel, 1 trestle bridge, 1 overbridge, and another 3 floating bridges. Frankly, even these 6 bridges over the Suez Canal fulfill far more than the needs of the single division permitted stationing in Sinai. In fact, 2 bridges would be sufficient for a single division. But the most significant development since 2004 is the inexplicable buildup of canal crossings. Since 2004, and primarily in recent years, Egypt has increased the number of crossing options of the canal from 6 to approximately 60. More precisely, 58 bridges of various types have been built. That is a 10-fold increase, which has been undertaken with no events in the field, no development in the Sinai necessitating such effort. The bridges, as noted in the table, are of various types. There are 5 military bridges. There are 17 bridges laid on the bank, which we will discuss later. There are rapid construction assault regiments and tunnels, which I will also expand on. But in any case, the main point to emphasize is that there has been an increase from 6 crossings to 58. Let's look at a number of specifics. One type of bridge developed by the Egyptians since 2004 is partially assembled floating bridges laid out on the beach, along with the construction of a type of ramp on which portions of the floating bridge are placed. Simply by releasing a screw at the front of the ramp, each bridge portion slides into the water as soon as any type of alert is issued. Such floating bridges may then be assembled from 16 segments within an hour and a half, or 2 at the most. Since 2004, the Egyptians have constructed 17 bridges of this kind, and they continue to develop them. An additional area of significant development concerns tunnels. A single tunnel below the Suez Canal had been excavated under President Anwar Sadat. After el-Sisi's rise to power, beginning in 2015, Egypt excavated an additional 5 tunnels. Of these, 2 are in the north, in the Port Said area, 2 in the center, in the vicinity of Ismailia, and another in the south, in the Suez area, joining the original tunnel excavated in the days of Sadat. Each tunnel is 8 meters wide and allows 2-way or 2-lane traffic. Such tunnels allow for a rapid deployment over the Suez Canal, and I would like to go into detail about this. Most of the other crossings on the Suez Canal consist of floating military bridges, which allow for a limited and slow-paced advance, because otherwise the bridge would simply tear apart. This isn't the case for tunnels, which allow movement at road speeds, which provides a great advantage for a nation wishing to transport large forces over short time periods. So that's one prominent advantage. A second major advantage is surprise about an invasion. When armies need to be transported on a military bridge, not in a tunnel, the upshot is a halt to any travel in the Suez Canal. So obviously, the transport of any significant military force requires halting sea travel for many hours, which would alert the whole world. On the other hand, tunnels allow crossing or aggregating forces without such forewarning. Obviously, intelligence may be equipped with other means to be aware of force movements. The ability to covertly transport significant forces through the tunnels necessitates that the State of Israel remain on high alert, so as not to be surprised to discover that Sinai is suddenly filled with soldiers. The next area to be discussed is the development of a network of highways in Sinai. Construction of most of these highways began in 2014. Currently, all arteries leading from the Suez Canal area toward the Israeli border are highways, with the northern artery consisting of a two-way, three-lane highway. The same applies for the primary artery, which consists of two-way travel, 3 lanes each way, and the third southern road leading to Eilat, which is a 2-lane highway. In theory, paving roads could be viewed as a civilian development, but an analysis of these highways shows that the primary highway, which should in theory connect the capital of Sinai, El-Arish, to Ismailia and Cairo, in reality does not continue on to El-Arish, instead turning east toward the Israeli border in the Ktziot area. Alongside development of the highway network, Egypt has acquired approximately 750 additional tank transporters, and its overall order of forces currently numbers approximately 1,860 tank transporters. Such figures allow for rapid mobilization of forces to Sinai as well, but not only there. The next area of infrastructural development concerns the expansion of the network of ammunition depots. By 2007, there were approximately 400 field bunkers in Sinai, covering approximately 25,000 square meters. Between 2007 and 2010, this network grew by 158%, adding another 460 bunkers. Currently, there are a total of at least 840 bunkers in Sinai on approximately 65,000 square meters. The military significance of this bunker network is that Egypt has developed the ability to supply a force of at least 5 divisions in Sinai without the need to bring ammunition from Cairo. An additional area of interest lies in the logistical framework increasing military fuel reserves. I emphasize the word military because there is a lot of civilian fuel in Sinai as well. Here I refer to military fuel stored below ground. What we had to contend with until 2007 was 9 regional fuel facilities with a total capacity of approximately 20 million liters of fuel. Between 2007 and 2010, this network grew by 130%, bringing an additional large reserve of 25 million liters, following which this network continued to expand. Beginning in 2015, Egypt developed a strategic fuel reserve in Sinai with a capacity of 120 million liters. Overall, there are currently 183 million liters of military fuel in Sinai, representing an increase of approximately 900% compared to 2007. Obviously, such a huge quantity of fuel is not intended solely for land units, and it appears that the fuel is also meant for the Egyptian Air Force and Navy. In addition to expanding military fuel reserves in Sinai, Egypt is also developing strategic fuel reserves for use by the Egyptian nation. A strategic fuel reserve, in contrast to a military fuel reserve solely serving the Army, is a general-purpose reserve. This could be used by the Army, land units, aerial units, as well as civilian uses, if any. The common feature of all strategic fuel reserves developed in Egypt since 1973 is that they are all, without exception, constructed in the area east of Cairo. They are primarily being built in the canal area, with a sole facility in Safaga, probably for the Egyptian Navy in the Red Sea. Since 1973, Egypt has added strategic fuel reserves with approximately 545 million liters of total capacity. Those reserves are in addition to those prepared during the 1973 war. I emphasize the fact that they are all being built east of Cairo instead of spread throughout all of Egypt, where they could be used by the Egyptian people. An additional infrastructure element being constructed is a command headquarters for a number of divisions in the Jebel Hashiva in Sinai, on a site previously used, incidentally, as an Israeli command post. Since 2015, the Egyptians have constructed large headquarters housing thousands of people, a clear indication that such headquarters is not headquarters for the sole division permitted in Sinai. A division does not require headquarters of thousands of people, and obviously, anyone constructing headquarters in such a scope is planning to command forces exceeding a number of divisions. I will now move on to discuss the west bank of the canal, but still in the area between Cairo and the canal. Egypt has been constructing large tunnels in this area since the Yom Kippur War, intended for strategic weapons system storage. When I speak about large tunnels, I mean tunnels approximately 7 meters in diameter. We don't know their length, but it's reasonable to assume that they are at least a few dozen meters, and such tunnels are usually intended for the storage of strategic weapons, such as long-range, ground-to-ground missiles. Obviously, they can also be used to store chemical, nuclear, and other types of weapons. But I repeat that I am not saying that Egypt possesses nuclear weapons. Such tunnels have only been constructed in proximity to the Suez Canal. This phenomenon is not known in the remaining Egyptian areas facing threats, such as the alleged Libyan or Ethiopian borders. An additional infrastructure segment is the expansion of airports, primarily for military use. A brief background is in order here. There are approximately 60 airports in Egypt, of which 43 serve the military. Airports constructed in Egypt primarily around the time of the 1973 war currently consist of approximately 1,000 hardened aircraft shelters. Such shelters are a type of reinforced structure protecting fighter jets from bombing. Beginning in 2013, work has been undertaken to expand 15 airports, including paving 11 new airstrips and 134 new shelters. The main attribute, as you can see on the map, is that the majority of the airports are being built in the Cairo area. The canal, with 3 being built in Sinai, in absolute contradiction of a provision in the peace accord which prohibits the construction of airports by Egypt. As discussed, there were 3 airports built in Sinai. One in El Arish is located approximately 60 kilometers from the Israeli border and currently comprises 3 strips and 8 shelters, with the remainder in Malaiz and Jebel Hashiva. To summarize, 65% of the development work in the airports have been undertaken in the Cairo, Canal, and Sinai areas. The next segment concerns the ports. By 2012, Egypt possessed approximately 30 ports. Since then, at least 8 and perhaps as many as 10 military ports have been constructed, in addition to 7 to 9 civilian ports. By looking at the locations of the ports on the map, you can see that the majority are being constructed on the Mediterranean, with a few being built on the Red Sea. Common to the development of the ports is the emphasis on constructing them in Egypt's western portion. Such ports would allow the Egyptian Navy, should it wish to do so, to block sailing routes to Israel. As we know, Israel's major supply routes are oceanic. This slide represents military ports being constructed in Egypt. These are large ports. They are characterized by long piers, generally around 1,000 meters. Each such base can also house thousands of soldiers. Here you can see an example of base headquarters. This represents an investment of billions of dollars in each port. As I mentioned, at least 8 such ports are military. There are 2 in their initial stages, and we cannot yet determine whether they are purposed as military or civilian. I am nearing the end of my talk and will summarize Egypt's investments in its reinforcement. Adding them up, I arrive at these minimum figures. The cost of procurement contracts signed with global nations that I can document totals at least $40 billion. Likewise, Egypt is in advanced discussions for additional procurement valued at $10 billion. I estimate an additional $20 billion of military equipment manufactured in Egypt in a wide range of military industry factories, as well as procurement contracts not published by the media. In other words, covert procurement contracts such as interception technology, procurement from North Korea, or all sorts of transactions conducted under the table. Estimating development of all military infrastructure, my extremely conservative estimate thus totals $50 billion. Overall, since 2013, Egypt has invested at least $120 billion in its military reinforcement. Obviously, the question must then be asked, why are they reinforcing? As I mentioned in my introduction, the answer lies in an analysis of the geographical spread of military and strategic infrastructure facilities in Egypt. Most of the items I mentioned in this talk are concentrated in the area between Cairo and the Israeli border. The remaining Egyptian regions, such as its border with Libya or Sudan, are witnessing hardly any military development. Most of the resources are being allocated in this single direction, and therefore my conclusion is that Egypt is preparing its theater of war with Israel, while simultaneously neglecting all other threats. Should my assumptions be correct, and they are indeed preparing for war against Israel, the question of why then arises. What is it that they are after? After all, they received Sinai and in theory have no need for war. I would like to preemptively state that the Egyptian army is no longer concerned with the possibility of Israel initiating any action toward Sinai. Anyone closely watching, as I do, Egyptian reinforcement in Sinai, knows that Egypt has abandoned the defensive network constructed at the time in the Sinai. Such a move indicates that the Egyptian army is no longer concerned with an Israeli attack. Furthermore, anyone tracking public opinion in Israel knows that Israel has no ambition to return to a control of Sinai. So what do they want? In my opinion, the reason may be found in the trampled honor of the Egyptian army as a result of the military appendix to the peace accord. The military appendix to the accord was forced upon the Egyptian army, and it has tried to sabotage and attack it in any way possible since it was signed. In other words, the issue of infrastructural development in Sinai, in violation of the agreement, did not begin today. Even before the ink had dried on the peace accord, Egypt has tried to belittle and claw away at it. The peace accord humiliated an army that is not permitted to conduct itself as master of its own land. To anyone wishing to find support for such a theory, I suggest consulting an interview with Colonel Amos Gilad, who engaged in protracted negotiations with the Egyptians, which can be found on my website. If Egypt cancels the peace agreement with Israel, it will reduce the opposition of Islamist elements to President Sisi's regime. Such a move would help Egypt return to leading the Arab world. Since these are all speculations, let us leave for a moment the issue of intentions and simply inspect what we might call capabilities. What does all this great military development permit them to do? We must reach the following conclusions. The 58 crossings on the Suez Canal, the procurement and the increase in orders of forces of tank transporters to 1,860, the logistical framework constructed in Sinai, and the network of highways paved toward the Israeli border all allow Egypt to mobilize a force of at least 3, and probably closer to 5, divisions, and deploy them on the Israeli border within less than a day. In addition, Egypt can land a division on Israeli beaches, thanks to a navy which now comprises at least 34 landing craft. The reinforcement of the navy and the ports constructed in western Egypt provide Egypt with the option of blocking sailing routes to Israel in the Mediterranean, which is Israel's primary source of supply, not only of weapons, but also of food. The huge warehouses and weapon systems and the developed military industry allow Egypt to conduct a war over a long period of time without depending on imports. Finally, the deteriorating economic conditions in Egypt, primarily a result of the allocation of scarce resources to the military, create an instability which requires close monitoring of events in Egypt. The things we spoke about today represent only the tip of the iceberg regarding preparations in the Egyptian military. If you wish to learn more about events in Egypt, please visit my websites. The URL is now on the screen. Please also look up my YouTube channel. Both contain copious information concerning both military issues and the Egyptian army's handling of Islamist organizations in Sinai, as well as civilian matters such as development of infrastructure systems, the economy, and governmental conduct. I have also written a book in Hebrew named Modain Talush Mi'akarkar, Groundless Intelligence, Success and Failure in the IDF's Geographic Military Intelligence. The book details my background, with details on the operation of the intelligence branch of the Israeli General Staff Headquarters. The majority of the book is devoted to the significance of geographical intelligence analysis and how such analysis has impacted Israel's wars since the day of its